Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving into a truly fascinating historical exploration derived from our source text on ancient alternative spirituality. Specifically, we're going to be unpacking the foundational concepts of Babylonian Gnosticism and the Gnostic vision of Jesus Christ. It's like looking at a totally different timeline of early spiritual movements, long before Orthodox structures fully took over the narrative. Let's get right into it. So our source text kicks things off with an incredibly provocative question. Think about this. Is Christ a redeemer by blood or a bringer of liberating knowledge? Now, this isn't just some minor theological quibble. Oh no, it represents a massive fork in the road of early Christian thought. Looking at the text objectively, we see a radical departure from the traditional story. Instead of a transactional view of salvation, the Gnostic text proposes a completely open principle. It's all about a free search for truth, where Christ represents pure truth, love, and life, with absolutely zero deception. It literally reframes the entire spiritual quest from the ground up. To help us make sense of this profound historical shift, our source breaks this complex theology down into 5 foundational pillars. We'll be looking at 1, the core shift, 2, awakening versus blind faith, 3, bypassing spiritual middlemen, 4, liberation from fear, and finally, 5, modern echoes of Gnosis. All right, let's jump straight into the first one. Section 1, the Gnostic paradigm shift, redefining the search for truth. Okay, so before we can really grasp the specific beliefs of these ancient seekers, we need to understand the fundamental shift in how they viewed the pursuit of ultimate truth itself. And it all boils down to a stark contrast between 2 very different Greek words, pistis and gnosis. According to the text, the emerging Orthodox view leaned heavily on pistis. The source characterizes this as basically obedience to dogma, or a kind of blind faith. You believe simply because you're told to believe. But on the flip side, we have gnosis, and gnosis translates to a deep, personal, inner knowing. It's a completely free, individual search. The source actually identifies this massive transition from demanding strict obedience to encouraging a totally free, personal search as the most radical legacy of the entire Gnostic tradition. And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates exactly why such a philosophy was viewed as a massive, massive threat to the emerging church empire. The text lays out 3 key reasons for this. First, a spiritual model that's based purely on an individual's deep inner knowing, well, that just cannot be controlled by external power structures. Second, it can't be monetized or taxed. There's no toll booth. And third, it operates entirely without institutional fear. Think about it. If spirituality is viewed as a deeply personal, inward journey, an external empire literally has zero leverage over the individual. So, from an institutional standpoint, this whole Gnostic model was just completely unmanageable. Moving right along to Section 2, awakening versus blind faith, the first pillar. So, this first pillar really zooms in on the active, and let's be real, sometimes totally disruptive nature of a spiritual awakening. The source notes that in the Orthodox framework, a believer is basically required to accept truth that's mediated by an external authority. We're talking priests, bishops' councils, that sort of thing. And the text points out that this was demanded even when those teachings didn't quite make logical sense. But let's look at the Gnostic view. Here, Christ doesn't demand submission or blind obedience, not at all. Instead, Christ acts as an illuminator. It's like he's handing the individual a set of tools to actively reveal and see right through illusion. It's an active, hands-on process of discovery, not just passively accepting a list of rules. To really grasp the true weight of this active search, we need to look at this incredibly visceral quote from the Gospel of Thomas. This is a major text with Gnostic characteristics cited in our source. Listen to this. "Let him who seeks continue seeking until he finds. When he finds, he will become troubled. When he becomes troubled, he will be astonished, and he will rule over the all." I mean, really think about the wording there. The text is arguing that the search for truth is this active, unbound, and frankly, internally painful process of awakening. It troubles you. It shakes you up. It's not about finding nice, comfortable answers to tuck you in at night. It's about a radical, internal transformation that eventually leads to ultimate mastery. All right, Section 3, bypassing spiritual middlemen, the second pillar. Now, this pillar dives into a truly fascinating historical assertion, the idea that true spirituality simply has absolutely no room for institutional managers. The text impartially lays out this fundamental clash over who actually owns the truth. In the Orthodox model, at least as described by the source, truth is treated almost like institutional property. It's doled out to the masses, piecemeal, in exchange for obedience and participation in specific rituals. But the Gnostic model argues something entirely different. They believed that if Christ is pure truth, love, and life, well, that completely eliminates the need for what the text calls human managers of salvation. Truth is an immediate, direct experience. You don't need a middleman or a toll collector on the bridge to the divine. And the absolute crux of this pillar is the concept of the divine spark, or pneuma. The Gnostics believed that this divine spark, a literal piece of the realm of light, isn't kept locked away in a building or held exclusively by a priest. No, it is located directly inside the individual, directly inside you. In this framework, Christ the Illuminator isn't there to judge. He's there to remind the individual of who they already are. This pneuma, this spark, is believed to give a direct, unmediated connection to Barbello, the source, the highest good. When you view the divine as being entirely within, the whole concept of a spiritual middleman just instantly evaporates. Which brings us to section 4, liberation from fear, the third pillar. This pillar analyzes how these two very different theological frameworks either rely on or completely reject the use of fear. Our source material actually makes a pretty bold sociological claim here. It argues that any religious system based on power fundamentally requires an element of fear to sustain itself. Fear of hell, fear of demons, fear of a punishing God. The text suggests this is exactly how populations are kept in the dark and controlled. Conversely, the Gnostic path of perfect love and inner gnosis offers a totally different motivation. It relies entirely on recognizing a shared light essence within yourself and within others. The Gnostic Christ doesn't offer salvation through extortion or threats, which, as you can imagine, completely strips away the leverage of fear. To really wrap our heads around this, we need to quickly define a super important key term from the text, the demiurge. The Gnostics believed that the physical, material world was actually crafted by an arrogant creator of matter, that's the demiurge, who uses fear to rule and dominate. The Gnostic Christ comes in bringing the knowledge that literally tears a person away from the demiurge's power. And here is why this matters so much for everyday life. According to the source, a person who achieves gnosis acts ethically and with love. But not because they are terrified of divine punishment from the demiurge. They do it because they recognize the exact same divine light in others that exists within themselves. It makes sense, right? A person who is totally free from fear simply cannot be manipulated. And finally, section 5, modern echoes of gnosis, the burden of freedom. So how do these centuries-old concepts apply to us today, specifically regarding a personal responsibility? Well, as pure and incredibly liberating as this open principle of free searching sounds, the source text is very clear that it comes with a heavy, heavy burden. This path requires absolute courage and total personal responsibility. Why? Because you completely lose the ability to hide behind the authority of a religious leader. You can't just fall back on the prepackaged, easy answers of a catechism. Actually, scratch that. It's not just about losing the ability to hide. It's about stepping up. Seeking truth entirely within yourself, without the safety net of a massive institution telling you exactly what to think, requires incredible bravery and absolute accountability. Which brings us to the final lingering question posed by our source material. How does this Gnostic appeal for personal responsibility and the totally free search for truth resonate today? Especially in an era full of confusion, but also marked by a massive societal disillusionment with traditional hierarchical institutions. It's a really profound thought to end on. I mean, these texts might be ancient, but this tension between institutional authority and the personal, independent search for truth, that is arguably more relevant right now than ever before. So keep seeking, keep asking those hard questions, and I will catch you in the next one.